Why do you think the school didn't do anything?
I just felt like because it was Gilbert, it's ranked the second safest city in the United States, that they just swept it under the rug. They just thought, oh, it was kids being kids and it would go away.
And by these kids, you mean the Gilbert Goons?
Yeah, these ones that were
This was
him.
the early days of the Gilbert Goons.
Yeah. Nobody was saying anything. I was like, where's the fathers? There's nobody saying anything. I don't think the families in this area knew what was really going on.
And I have 4 teenage daughters who are in these schools with these kids. And they were like, oh yeah, Mom, that's the Goons. And I'm like, wait, you know these kids? They're like, oh yeah, they're everywhere. And like when you see them coming, you just leave, like they're bad news. And many of their parents look like you and I and had no idea what their son was doing.
Can you talk about what happened with Preston?
Plain and simple, these kids kept going because nobody held them accountable. And they beat a kid to death and left him in the street, just like they had done 100 times before. This time they killed somebody, and his name was Preston Lord.
This is a story of 2 people sharing different perspectives of a tragic story. And it's one that parents never want to have to deal with, and one where authorities and other people in charge should have stepped in, but didn't. It's my honor to introduce Rick, Kuehner, and Katey McPherson. Rick and Katey, welcome to the Brink.
Thank you for having us.
So much.
Yeah, so appreciative of you being here. This is a really serious story. And I want to get started by talking about kind of how this kind of impacted you, Rick, personally, kind of right in front of your face, at your front door. Can you tell us about that moment?
Yeah, it was August 18th, 2023, 10:30 in the evening, and my son comes up. I'm in my room, getting ready to go to bed, and he comes up, crying and screaming. And I said, "What's going on?" And I look at him, and he's just covered in blood everywhere, and his shoes are gone, his pants are ripped. I'm like, I was just in shock. I didn't even know what happened. And that's when he told me he got jumped by, a group of kids he didn't even know over at the In-N-Out. And that from that moment on, it just gave me a whole new perspective of what's really going on in Gilbert, or not even there, just in the East Valley for the most part, but specifically in the Gilbert area. So I would say that day was life-changing for me. There was things that led up to that, but you never really think anything's going to happen until it happens. And that was the night that it happened, and it changed both of our lives for forever. So.
Did he come home alone?
He did. He drove. He actually, I don't know how he did it, but he drove home. So a friend followed him to make sure he got there okay. But he did.
And you said some things led up to this. There were maybe some signs that something wasn't right. Had he encountered this group before?
Not. This group's so random. So he didn't know any of these kids. 3 of them were adults. Two were minors. There was many things that led up to it. He's been bullied before, and I've gone to the school authorities. I've gone to the police. I gave them plenty of information, plenty of red flags, and they didn't do anything about it. So
this was the first time you actually saw physically how this was impacting him?
No, he when he was a freshman, he got beat up pretty bad at a bus stop. And I literally had to drive and pick him up. He was laying on the street because he couldn't move because he got so much damage to his kidneys, so he couldn't walk. So I literally had to pick him up off the street and put him in the car and get medical attention for him. And that was the first time. And not so much after that, he got attacked in the bathroom at school and got beat up pretty bad from that.
So as a parent, that's heart-wrenching, obviously, because you feel powerless. What did you take to the school? Were you taking pictures? Were you bringing them? Were you going in with them to the school? What was the process that you followed?
Well, I immediately went to the principal and requested a meeting. We knew who the kid was that attacked him the first time, and he did end up going to juvenile because he had a long list of other things that happened to him. So he was actually removed from the school because he lived in the same apartment complex we did too. So, and they were actually friends at some point. But turns out he was part of a gang from South Chicago. His father was in prison as a gang member, so he probably just thought he was following in his dad's footsteps. I don't know, but he was a lot of trouble. For a lot of kids in the school, he was dealing drugs, selling drugs, and I would see you go to his car. He had a duffel bag, and there was just drugs in there and stuff, and that really opened my eye up. I was like, and then he had guns as well. So I brought all this to the attention of the principal, the Gilbert police, who was the SRO that was at the school. And I said, I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but there's all this stuff going on. So I don't know. They kind of, I kind of feel the principal went kind of through the motions there, at least acted like he was empathetic to a point. And then after the second time he got attacked was because while this kid was in juvie, he contacted his friend, and
who was not in juvie.
He's not in juvie. He was 18, I think, and a senior, and he was in a lot of trouble too. But it was the gang thing. He said because they felt Tristan narked on him, he had to pay the price. So when he went into the bathroom, that's when he attacked him. And my son's a swimmer, a competitive swimmer, so it was the day right before state. But he got beat so bad on his back that he had bruises. He couldn't even move his arm. So he really couldn't compete the next day. Now they had that on video, the school did, so they knew they could verify who it was. They expelled him. But as far as like the officer and pressing charges, they were both minors, and he said, yeah, we can't do anything because my son tried to put his hands up to defend himself. It was deemed mutual combat. So they can't.
So your son, just for putting his hands up to defend himself, this
Right.
kid, nothing happened to him.
Nothing happened to him. So it was frustrating, which later I found out that no, he could have been arrested for that. So this is where it all started to begin. It's like, the schools aren't really doing anything. The police aren't really doing anything. And then because of that, I ended up moving him out of that school. They did his sophomore year, and then he kept getting, he just kept getting picked on. The kids were like, they're pretty ruthless, they were making fun of him because he got beat up,
So they had heard what happened to him previously
Yeah.
and then decided to make him a target again.
Well, I don't think so. I don't think those two individuals really didn't have anything to do with the Gilbert Goons or anything. They were just trouble from another state that came here, and then they're gone.
Why do you think the school, before you moved, didn't do anything? Why do you think they just went through the motions? And even for the cops, why not do something?
I think a lot of it, now that I look back at it, is there's a lot of opportunity for the schools to get better training, mandatory, reporting training, and how to deal with kids that come to them with, bullying or harassment or something like that. It just seems like, I just felt like because it was Gilbert, it's ranked the second safest city in the United States, that they just swept it under the rug. They just thought, oh, it was kids being kids and it would go away. And that's when I really, because I was naive to it. I thought, oh yeah, you go to school, everything was going to be fine. I didn't have any idea any of this was going on. And especially to the extent that it was going on. I was totally surprised when I found that out. I transferred just a mile down the road to Perry High School. Start his junior year, we're going to start fresh. He's got a best friend that lives there. We were able to get an exception for him to swim, so he didn't have to sit out, all that stuff. And then I don't even think he ended up going 6 days there before this all happened, but he was getting threats, which I brought to the vice principal who was in charge of the 11th graders, and the SRO officer gave him that information, showed him the pictures from the Snapchat, all those things. And I told him, I said, it's not a matter of if it happens, it's a matter of when.
And you're saying the online threats turning into something more real.
Yeah, because the kids were there at the school, and they were happening during school hours, you know. And the thing is, my son didn't even know any of these kids. He had no clue who they were. So I'm not exactly sure why or how any of this happened. We've had some ideas, maybe because he had a nice car, he's a good-looking kid, he's an athlete. I don't know. But as it turns out, these kids were in a lot of trouble before, even from elementary school. And I know Katey can fill you in on all those. But
and by these kids, you mean the Gilbert Goons?
Yeah, these ones that were
this was
harassing him.
The early days of the Gilbert Goons, or what we know as the Gilbert Goons, because they have made national media. Yeah. The reason we reached out to you is because we both were in the New York Times. Yeah. And so this is the group you're talking about.
Yeah, and they were spread out. There's quite a few of them. I don't know, anywhere from 40 or 50 of them from what we understand. And
so they found them online? No,
these kids use Snapchat everywhere, so everybody's on Snapchat. And I don't know, and if you're in a group, other people can join, you don't even know. And that's how it happened. So he's probably in a group he didn't even know, and other kids are in there. And, it's like 3 seconds, these kids communicate within like 3 seconds, and stuff spreads and rumors. And anyway, it got out of hand. And I remember going to the school and specifically reporting it, and nothing happened. As a matter of fact, I told them, I said, hey, one of the kids that's doing it sits next to him in math. And their solution was, we'll just move them to another table. That was their solution. So the principal was totally aloof to the whole situation. Vice principal didn't really, I don't think he took it serious. And then the SRO officer, he was worthless.
And so how long did this go on?
Well, it happened for a few days where right after I reported it. And then a few days later, like 5 of them showed up at my house. And
were you home?
I was home. My son was home. The garage was open. They parked. I was walking my dog, so I wasn't in the house. They park in front of my house, take a picture because my son's car was in the garage. They send it to Tristan, and they say, "Hey, we're here." And originally it was 3 people in a car. And then another car pulls up behind them, and they get out and they open the trunk. I don't know what they were looking for in there. And then Tristan's texting me, hey, they're here. I'm like, who's here? He goes, these guys have been threatening me, and they're here to, they said they're going to kick my ass and your ass. And I said, okay, we'll stay in the house. I bring my dog back in, and I saw them parked in front of my house. And he's like, Dad, don't go out. He was worried, something was going to happen because he knows all these kids have guns and stuff like that. So I said, just get in the house. And I went out there, and I was just going to go out there to try to videotape, get the license plate numbers and stuff. But the sun was going down, so I couldn't get a good picture of it. And then when I walked closer to them, they eventually took off. And I'd already called the police, and they were on their way. So they showed up, took statements. One car went after the other car because they thought they knew where they were. But anyway, they didn't do anything. They didn't catch him or anything. Police officer was trying to figure out what was going on. I gave him my son's phone because I wanted to make sure my son wasn't antagonizing somebody and causing this. And, he spent about an hour going through the phone and all, looking at all the messages, and couldn't yeah, there's no reason. We don't understand this. So the case just closed, and that was it. And they took off. So, but at that point, I was, I started getting a little PTSD because I was like, my son didn't want to go he was afraid to go out. So I went to the school and I was seeking help, some by myself. And, his mother lives in Europe. So it's just me. And between work and everything, I just didn't know what to do. And quite honestly, I was shocked because I just couldn't believe this was happening, especially in Gilbert. So I went to one of the counselors. I went to the principal. I said, "Hey, what are some options? My son can't come back to the school because something's going to happen." And they didn't give me any information, anything like that. So I said, that's when they said, "Oh, well, we can just move this kid to another table or something." I said, "You know what? Where do I sign? I'm going to withdraw him out of there." And then, because they weren't offering any solutions to any of it. And quite honestly, I just don't think they took it seriously enough. And it wasn't soon after that, like a few days after that, he asked if he could go with some friends just to the drive-thru. I live like 5 minutes to the In-N-Out. And at first I said no. My gut said no, something's going to happen. And he said, "Look, I'm going to be in the car in the drive-thru. Nothing's going to happen." I'm like, "Okay, you got 15 minutes. I gave him 15 minutes. And that's all it took. He was gone 15 minutes. And that's when I found out. So they jumped him. They pulled up in a pickup truck, and about 10 kids got out, surrounded him. They didn't even know him. The kids didn't even know him. And one of the kids came from behind and sucker punched him. And when they did that, my son ran, and then they all ran after him, tackled him to the ground and beat him. So.
And just for context, because a lot of people don't know where Gilbert is, you moved to Gilbert because it's a nice suburb.
Yeah. I did a lot of
Phoenix.
research, when I moved here, because I read about it and how it was developing. It was ranked one of the second safest city, and had good schools, and I'd been renting a house prior to the house that I bought, and it was a great area. So I didn't know any of this stuff was going on. So I was a little naive, I think. And that definitely woke me up.
I think anyone would be surprised to hear that that's happening at a fast food parking lot. So what happened after that? Did you end up withdrawing him?
I did. I got him out. And then there was no other option than talking to his mother. And this wasn't just an isolated incident at Perry High School or whatever. It was at all these high schools. I was finding out a lot of things were happening. So I didn't feel safe for him going anywhere. And so I sent him. It was the hardest decision I ever had to make, but for his own safety and all, I sent him to Europe to stay with his mom, because it's totally different over there. Schools, they don't have guns, anything like that. So he spent 2 years over there. He missed his junior year because of what happened. So he ended up taking courses online, but he did 11th and 12th grade in 1 year to catch back up.
Wow.
And he was going to a high school in Italy, knowing that he wouldn't pass the classes because it was Italian, but he learned how to speak fluent Italian because of that. And that was the whole reason we did that. Because we were trying to make positive things out of all this stuff happening, but it wasn't the same. So
how was his mental health?
Well, it was tough. He'd get up in the morning and he'd see that scar on his lip, and he'd say, "Dad, I want to get plastic surgery or something," because every time I see it, it reminds me. If you walk up behind him, he'd freak out, so stuff like that. Now he's grown and he's probably over that now, but he's not the same son I had. He's still having problems now. So
how did he feel about being sent to Europe? Did he understand the tough decision you were faced with?
Yeah, I think so. it was, I think he didn't want to go, but he didn't want to stay here either. He didn't feel safe. Everywhere he went, he had to go with me, to the gym, to the store.
At a time when you're trying to find your own independence.
Yeah, it was hard, and if I got a call from him, I'd freak out, a text, because I just, so it's been very tough. So.
Did you find other parents that were being impacted by this same group during this time?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And what were they saying?
That's where she comes in, because I met her by accident. Is it Nextdoor app? Yeah. I just happened to download it, I don't know, a week or so before that. I never looked at it. And after it happened, I saw people talking about it. So I remember replying to something, and then she replied, and she never looks at Nextdoor either. Mm-mm. And that's how we met, and we connected. And she's been involved in this a lot longer and knew a lot more. And when I met her and started hearing all these stories, similar stories, some even worse, I was like, what? And that really woke me up. So I started getting involved. When my son moved, I said, nobody was saying anything. I was like, where's the father? There's nobody saying anything. I said, this can't be right. So I got in touch with the media, or they got in touch with me. I can't remember. And then next thing you know, I'm like on the news every night, and I'm, because I'm pissed off, and I'm like, somebody's got to do something about that. And nobody, I don't think the families in this area knew what was really going on. And then it just opened it up from there. And then, of course, more people started reaching out to us, and got national attention. And now, hopefully, our whole purpose was just to make some changes in this community to, reduce the amount of violence that was going on, and bring awareness to parents, because these parents, I think, either they were too busy and weren't paying attention to what their kids were doing. That's got to be a fact, because they didn't. And why wasn't the police department doing anything about this? Because they actually knew about it way back, like in 2019. This has been going on for years, but they just kept sweeping it under the rug. And I don't know how many videos we watched of kids getting beat, gang beaten, and all the drugs and all the guns that they have. I can't believe the types of guns and stuff they have. It would blow your mind. So, and where do they get them? They're all minors, So, yeah, there's so much. That's just what happened to me. But because of that, there's so much more, so many more layers that have happened before that. And I do remember, though, I guess because I opened my big mouth and started bringing attention to this, all of a sudden parents were contacting me, people were contacting me saying, hey,
this been through the same thing.
This happened to me at this school, this happened to me at this school, and they didn't do anything, and they didn't do anything. And then Katey can probably tell you more about all that, because it's a lot.
So Katey, Rick says you knew a lot more even before what happened to Tristan. How are you a part of this story?
So I have spent a long time in the schools. I spent 22 years in Scottsdale and Gilbert School District, and left to do advocacy work. So that's what I currently do. So a lot of parents reach out to me for resources. My kid's anxious, my kid's depressed, my kid's suicidal, my kid needs a special ed IEP, like just all sorts of random things. But I actually had a good friend's son who went through the exact same thing at the In-N-Out, at the same location, brass knuckles to the back of his head, gashed open, in December of 22. So this was...
Before.
Yeah. So yours was...
23.
August of 23?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Connor Jernigan, he's spoken publicly, so I feel like I can say his name. His mom had reached out to me and was like, my kid just got attacked. Like, this is what happened. I'm like, this is crazy. And I have 4 teenage daughters who are in these schools with these kids. And they were like, oh yeah, mom, that's the Goons. And I'm like, wait, you know these kids? They're like, oh yeah, they're everywhere. They're in my social studies class. You know, they're having bonfires. They're at In-N-Out. And like, when you see them coming, you just leave. Like, they're bad news. And I was like, well, what kind of kids are these? And they're like, oh, like me, like they look like us, like same, and like showing me photos. And I'm like, okay, so this is a trend. And you know, Tristan's attack was the last point of intervention before Preston Lord was murdered by the same group, pockets of the same group. And it's hard to describe because, as he said, it's 90 kids wide. It's 16 different schools. It's not just Perry High. It's not just Campo. It's not just Hamilton. They're literally everywhere, and they barely know each other. But when they get together, they're bad news. And so from a school standpoint, from a police standpoint, from a parenting standpoint, it was really hard to connect the dots at first, but then not so hard once you saw the videos. But it took time for us, and we being a large group of parents, just getting together and starting to identify these kids on our own and starting to call police and saying, this kid and this kid and this kid. And many of their parents look like you and I. Good parents, well-resourced, engaged, committed, dedicated, and had no idea what their son was doing.
And so you're triangulating all these data points of these kind of, it seems like isolated incidences, but it's starting to feel like it's not. So how did you come together, and what was your objective? Did you choose a police department? Did you choose a school district? Because like you said, this was running across.
Yeah.
How did you do it?
We got loud. I mean, we just, so his post on Nextdoor was a response to a man's child who had been with Preston and was like, we have to find these kids. My kid just saw his best friend murdered. And so Rick was like, I think these are the kids that hurt my kid. And I started putting the points together, and we just all got together online. I mean, we just started crowdsourcing online, like, who wants to stand up for our town? And we started with the town of Gilbert at the town council. I emailed the town council. I emailed the chief of police. I'm like, I have all these videos of these kids who I don't have names to, who did this prior to Preston dying. I've met this man. I've met this man. Like, we have to do something. So we were able to harness, I don't know, probably the first group meeting, hundreds of people came to the first walk that we organized. Wow. That would have been November of 23, so a month after Preston died.
For anybody that maybe doesn't know, I know it did receive national attention.
Yeah.
And I think there was a lot of community support because it's devastating. But can you talk about what happened with Preston?
Yeah, I mean, plain and simple, these kids kept going because nobody held them accountable. They went one town over to a town who's never had a murder, who has a brand new police department, and they beat a kid to death and left him in the street, just like they had done 100 times before. This time they killed somebody, and his name is Preston Lord. And so Preston Lord's death has galvanized our larger regional community. And so our group we called the Upstanders. Instead of a bystander, be an upstander, which is what we as parents have always taught our kids, is stand up for others, stand up for yourself. So yeah, I mean, our group is smaller now. Some time has passed. But at one point we had hundreds of people, parents, kids, young adults, law enforcement, faith leaders, business leaders, everybody. It was all hands on deck.
So your daughters recognizing them must have been pretty frustrating that they were hiding in plain sight.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I am dialed in. Like, I know a lot of what goes on in this community, and I did not know. And so for me, I felt naive. Like, Rick's experience going to a school and asking for help with something that happened outside of school is common, very common. And as a former administrator, it's a tricky balance. Happen outside of school? Is it impeding the learning environment? Is it bleeding into the student day? Is it impacting his student? If we touch this one, then we have to touch the 17 other things that happen Saturday night. And so looking at these things it is a tricky balance. And I want to validate that for school administration, school superintendents, et cetera. However, the things that Rick and other parents were bringing to school administration attention were really big things: assault, brass knuckles, disorderly conduct, 10-on-1, online threats. All of these have statutes around them. And we do, as mandatory reporters, have to do something about it. So yeah, my middle daughter, who I love to pieces, was like, well, Mom, this is just how it is. And I'm like, no, this is not how it should be. And we need to fix this. And I said, the thing I think beyond what we've described so far that was so striking to me was the amount of children, to include girls, who were standing around with their phones, recording these beatings, doing nothing about it, saying nothing about it. And when I asked my middle daughter about it, she was like, well, Mom, if there's no receipt, then it didn't happen. And that's why we record everything, because they have been taught by us as parents. We record everything they do. We document what they're eating. If they go to the hospital, we take a video. We put it on Facebook. We tell the whole world through photos and videos the story. And so they're just mimicking what parents have been doing for 25 years. And so although her statement alarmed me, I understood why she said it. And so the receipts of these beatings are, thankfully, the sloppiness of recording it, uploading it to Snapchat and broadcasting it are, thankfully, what will bring the Lord family and families like Rick's justice.
Do you feel that the administrators could have acted differently earlier on?
100%.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then the police too, because I can't remember the amount of calls, but In-N-Out had reported hundreds, right? 300 and something.
Or something.
They've called in over 300 times to the police about kids fighting in the parking lot there. I'm thinking as a police chief, I'm it would only take 3 calls for me before I'm doing something about it.
Parking a car there.
Yeah. And they would, if you go there, it was packed. And they supposedly had cameras there. None of them were working, by the way. Even at the bank, they weren't working. That happened right where my son was. So, but the kid that I think orchestrated the whole thing actually videotaped it. And that's where the police got the recording of my son's beating the same night that it happened, and nothing happened to them. So, and it turned out the mother she worked for Chandler School District as well. It turned out the chief of police, his wife was a teacher at Perry High School. So there's all these, I'm like, you got to be kidding me. So it makes you think, maybe they were just all in cahoots and keeping it quiet so nobody
It's a
would
good
bring
family,
attention.
so look away.
Yeah, it was, but the fact that the police knew about this, and there's videos you can see where they're laughing. The police are laughing. These kids are beating down people, and the kids, they had no fear of the police. They would just laugh at their face because they knew they wouldn't do anything. So that was a big part of the problem there. And as our group, the Upstanders, I can remember going. There was probably 3 of us, myself and 2 others, and Katey was always on the phone or there as support for us. We would do patrols in downtown Gilbert into the parking garages and stuff. And we found so many things going on there, very disturbing things. And we would record them. We would report them to the police. Finally, and I remember in one of the town hall meetings, we reported, it was Ann that got up and spoke about the dangers of that parking garage, and because the kids would go up there, they smoke pot, they drink and stuff they're not supposed to, and then they would get up on the little ledge and walk. And if you know that, it's just it's like this. There's not much space. And one of our upstanders, she went to the council and told them about that. You guys need to do something about that. Put nets or something, because I think like Chandler did the same thing. Because it's not a matter of, if, it's a matter of when somebody's going to fall to their death there. And it wasn't too many months after that happened. Kid was drunk, got up there and fell to his death. So now, but we were bringing all these things to them. We're they're so reactive to everything. So even at the In-N-Out now, they closed the dining room down at 9, so nobody can get in there at 9 because it would be packed. You couldn't even see. And the lot there, they finally put a patrol car there. They put cameras up and lights and stuff. But they should have done that years ago, because none of that would have happened. And that's why I get so pissed off, because the whole thing with Preston Lord should have never happened. Because the red flags were there. They were there, and there was no consequences for these kids. That's the thing. That's why they keep doing it. There's no consequences. Was the one family I remember, it was like, I don't know how many kids went there in masks to their house, remember?
Yeah.
And they were threatening the family, and they called the police. They didn't do anything. And I mean, imagine that, 50 kids or something in ski masks coming up to your house. They just have no fear of anything because they knew nothing was going to happen. There was no consequences, and they were allowed to just run amok. So, and it was going on for a long time. The red flags were there. They didn't do anything about it between the school administrations, the police, and the parents, because it does start at home, right? Where's the parents?
That's what I wanted to ask about. That was the first question.
It's like, where's the if these parents even knew what their kids were doing, they would freak out. The things that I've heard and seen, I could not believe.
As a parent, that's what I've been sitting here wondering. Where are the parents? So when you started convening this group of upstanders, did any of those parents show up? No.
No, because their kids are still to this day facing murder one and kidnapping charges. So of the 7 boys that killed Preston, a couple of the kids that were involved in the beatings that were arrested and then released because they were juveniles and are on probation, community service, a couple of them reached out and to me and to him and others, and like, I'm so sorry, I had no idea. Or we were really struggling with him. We knew something was going on, but we just couldn't put our finger on it. And you also have to realize these kids were good actors. They went to school. They had jobs. They were on athletic teams. Like, they weren't like juvenile delinquents, right? Many of them had no record. Some of them had petty stuff, like they shoplifted a vape or something, but none of them, except the 2 that you named who had come from a gang, none of them were what you would think of who would do such a thing. So these kids, like my daughter said, like, so-and-so sits next to me in social studies, and he looks totally normal and acts totally normal. But outside of school, the group gang mentality, and although they weren't labeled an official gang, there was a hybrid gang mentality of like, when we get together, when we go out, we beat the shit out of somebody. And the victims were random. They were like, that kid. Like, many of these kids were going to In-N-Out just to get a cheeseburger with their friends, and walked out, and Connor gets hit in the back of the head with brass knuckles and almost becomes paralyzed. So there was no rhyme or reason to it. The 3 things that I will say that were present were absent parenting. So physically present in a house, much like this, affluent, resourced, engaged-ish. Substances and guns were a piece of this. And then there were a lot of kids struggling with mental health issues, depression, using the substances to numb out. And then the depression was manifesting itself as rage. So I think that is a big piece of this story, is that this was a mental health crisis that our town was going through. And on the front of the police and the schools, you also have to remember keeping a clean record makes us look good. So if you are a public school right now and you are competing for students against private and charters in a state that gives vouchers, then you don't want a black mark. You don't want anybody to know that these kids exist. And so you're going to minimize and invalidate what's actually going on. The police agency, you drive into Gilbert, second safest city in America. We're going to find out here shortly. There's a man that's been digging into, during this 10-year period, what was not reported, the underreporting. What I was also so amazed about was after Preston died, so many boys came forward and felt brave enough to say, this happened to me. And when we asked them, why didn't you report? They were like, one, I was mortified that I got beat up and it was recorded. It was viral. And two, they threatened to kill me and my mom and my family.
Wow.
And I wasn't willing to take that risk.
Yeah, they do that. And after Tristan got beat up, they threatened to kill him if he said anything. So that was another reason I had to move him out, because he just didn't know. But and listening to all the stories there, even parents said, hey, you know what? I still have kids there. I don't want to say anything because I'm afraid something will happen to them. And that's supposedly why they wouldn't say anything. And I was like, this is ridiculous. We can't let a bunch of teenagers run this town. So I was like, we have to be better than that. We can fix this. And, but we have to come together. The parents need to come together. They need to start attending town halls. They need to start attending the school board meetings and stuff like that. And it did for a while. They were packed. I mean, and they would get crazy in there too. But that passion's kind of died down since then.
But you did have some success because there was a law passed called Preston's Law. Mm-hmm. Can you share what that's about?
Yeah.
Well, I actually spoke at the Senate in front of the Senate committee. Rachel Mitchell, the county attorney, asked me to go there and speak. So I went there with Preston's stepmom and Rachel, and we presented, the law, the change in the law. So from what I understand, before if it was a class 6 felony if somebody was ganged up on, and I think it was a number of, had to be more than 4 people or something. What we proposed was that it could be 2 or more people, and it would be a class 4 felony, just to have, because what happens, just like with my son, all those kids, they got off. They pled guilty, and they got off with a misdemeanor.
And it was classified under Preston's Law as like swarming.
Yeah. Swarming, yeah. So we were excited, that passed, and I know Kuehner spoke in front of the Senate as well to get an ordinance to ban brass knuckles, which did not pass, unfortunately, but he was able to get it to pass in Queen Creek, Mesa, Gilbert, and Chandler, I believe, in those cities, because you could go to a smoke shop, be a minor, and buy brass knuckles. And then these kids all have brass knuckles. So,
have you seen change in the community since all of this?
Yeah, there's a higher sense of connection with your kid. People have their head on a swivel. People are monitoring phones. There's a vigilance around violence. So I think we've definitely raised awareness and education. The problems have not completely stopped. Like, we still have kids going out and doing destructive things. There've been some beatings where Preston's Law has been used. So we're not out of the woods, but I think the awareness and the education, I think parents in this community in particular are more aware and on high alert about what their kids are actually doing. I think the devices part of this is very important to think about and talk about too. If one of those parents had looked in their kid's camera roll and saw some of these videos, perhaps these kids could have been stopped. I mean, these videos did not surface until after Preston died. Kids were courageous to come out and say, like, here you go. I mean, the reason these kids, I think there were 95 arrests. The reason those kids were arrested because one teenager said, hey, Mom, here you go. And there was a channel, a Snapchat channel called Pound Town, as in pound people into the ground with your feet and your hands, where they housed all these videos. And she showed her mom. Her mom contacted me. I turned it over to Gilbert PD. And that is how those arrests were made. Without that, a lot of what the police feedback was we got the call for service to In-N-Out. We went there. As we were getting there, everybody scattered. We didn't have a willing victim. We can't press charges if we don't have a willing victim. And as a teenage boy, as evidence, like, you don't want anybody to know this happened to you. You don't want to be part of it. You don't want retaliation. You just want it to go away, which makes sense, if you know anything about teenage boys in particular.
There was a lot of people, and this was a thing, and it was going all across the news, because I'd be on the news and I'd see these teens attacking, like in New York City, an old person and beating them, and one killed them, but it was a thing to record these things. It was like a badge of honor for these kids, so it was cool to record these and all. And they got so desensitized from all that, seeing all that violence and stuff all the time, that's why they'd be laughing and filming why somebody's getting pummeled. I mean, and so that was really disturbing to see that, and you'd see it all across the United States. And our thing was, hey man, maybe the Upstanders, we can create this playbook, a blueprint or something that we used in our town to make some changes, and then people can borrow that and use it somewhere else. So that was kind of our goal, and I think it's still a work in progress as we go now. But it's just a shame to see that mentality. And the parents, a lot of these parents, they're business professionals. They're working all the time, so they're just not paying attention. They're on their phone, so they're not disturbing me. I can do what I think, and that's the problem, is they just don't know what's going on. The parents should know who are they talking to, what are they looking at they need to know those things, because it would probably blow their mind.
Is that the advice that you would give parents, whether their kid's a bully or their kid is being bullied?
Absolutely. Be involved. Get involved.
You have to be present.
You have to be involved.
And I think the social media piece, so, in prevention science, we talk about how do these things occur. Fill in the bullying can only occur if the conditions and environment allow it. Violence can only occur if the conditions and environment allow it. The school environment, the police environment, the community environment, the conditions were perfect for this. The social media acted as clout and an accelerant for the validation that these boys weren't feeling from their own nuclear family, whether they were married, divorced, stepchildren, whatever home they were in. This was a cry for help. And social media validated them. The kids recording validated them, and the conditions and the environment allowed it. And that's on us as adults, whoever we are, to make sure the conditions and the environment are healthy.
Absolutely. Before we wrap up, I want to ask about Tristan. What's he up to now?
He's in college, so he's freshman year. He's back home, so still has. I mean, it's not. We still have some struggles, and we're working on some things. So I'm hoping as time goes, and keeping him on the right track and working with him and on certain things, so that he'll grow up and learn from this, and be able to help other kids that maybe have went through something like this and be a support to them. But we'll see. Well, all we can do is just be positive and pray and make sure that I'm involved as much as I can. And it's definitely been a challenging few years.
The children and the community are so lucky to have both of you and all the parents that were here. I appreciate you sharing this story. It's an important one, and that I think isn't told enough. So with that, we are going to toast to healing and peace for your community and for all your children.
Amen.
Thank you. Thanks.
So here's to all of your children and
Yes.
justice for Preston Lord.
Yes.
Cheers.
Cheers.
We're talking right here.
Thank you.
That's
Phil.
good. Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah.
You can.
Yeah, really good.
Hey, it's Erica spilling truth, little wink. Life at the edge of a choice, that moment you tip or you think. Big laughs in the middle of chaos, soft heart in the heat of it all.